Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again. Another very quick video. I say very quick, it'll probably last about 20 minutes knowing me. This one is all about the Retron 5, which I found at the bottom of my wreckage cupboard. It was donated by a friend who owns a game shop in the northwest of England. And when he was selling me a Nintendo Entertainment System, he said, hey, why don't you just take this away from me because it's not working for me, there are problems with it. I'll go through what those problems are, but overall I want to talk about why should you buy a Retron 5 when you could possibly lay your hands on a Super Nintendo Classic, USB host mod it and use that instead. So let's just go through the Retron 5 and what it is. Well, it is I guess a new console, or relatively new console over the last few years. And it has 5 slots to fit in the original cartridges. So obviously you can play things like Sega Genesis games. I believe you can play Nintendo, there we go. You can play Nintendo games, NES games in there. You can play Super Nintendo games in there. You can play, I think it is Game Boy Advance games in there. You can play Famicon games in there. So it's, it's quite a lot. It does emulate, meaning that when you insert the game cartridge, which I'll do now. So just let me show you the on-screen menu for the Retron 5. It looks something like that. And if we go back down to the console, basically you take a cartridge, and you basically slide it into the correct slot like that, and it should detect on the front once it's ripped the actual the image from the card. And I'll just zoom in to show you. So as you can see, it's highlighted, or it's lit up the NES controller, meaning it's found an NES card. I'll zoom back out. And then it rips the game to its internal memory, and then you should be able to play the game. Now, the console itself comes with a Bluetooth controller, which is very, very suspect. The problem with this controller is it's got like a clicky D-pad, which isn't a proper D-pad at all. It's more like it does feel like it's got micro switches in there, which is nice, but it's just poor quality. It doesn't really fit one particular type of console, but it does function. I mean, listen to that. Is just a very, very basic switch, not a micro switch, and these are just very poor buttons. So let's just go back up to the screen and show you this. So using the controller that came with the Retron 5, which is wireless, we can play the ROM that's in there. It does have a HDMI, which is good. So as you can see, but it is emulation, and you can see that, I guess, via the left-hand side of the screen there, where it's got a strip of beige or some kind of very light colour there. If you want to know more about the Retron 5, I suggest having a really good look on YouTube. There's a lot of reviews about it. It tells you a lot about what you can do. You can patch the games. You can even sideload games on it. If you've got a cartridge, you just basically patch that game and load a full new game. Quite cool. I've done it myself. Just hitting the home button now on the Retron 5 and returning back to the main menu. So it's okay, but the biggest problem with the Retron 5 is the workmanship. So if we go back down to the console itself and look at it, while you can put in there 5 different cartridges, it's just, you have to really wrench the cards out. It's not easy to get the cards in and out, especially this Super Nintendo one, this NES one. So if I put it back in, it doesn't always, don't know if this one will read the, that one's read it again. It obviously gives the title at the top, but it doesn't always read the actual cartridge correctly, which is a problem. And when you look actually deep inside of the Retron 5, again, having to hold that down greatly. You can actually see, maybe not from this is a bad angle, but you can see that the pins start to bend incredibly early. This may be a very, very kind of first off the production line model, I guess, but it is very, very dodgy. I don't like it. I think it risks destroying game cartridges. I'm just going to turn it back on there. And I'll just give you the boot screen now for the Retron 5. But I guess the nice thing is it can be a completely legitimate console in a sense of you have to own the original cartridges to be able to play the games. Or if you have an SD card and some knowledge and you search YouTube, you can actually load fully patched new games. So you might only have Super Mario Brothers 2, but if you load the IPS file for Super Mario Brothers 3, you can play the entire new game. That's fairly straightforward, well documented. But it does play quite a few consoles, but there is a risk. And the risk is damage to the original cartridges. Now I've got a box here of Super Nintendo ones, and I'm going to put one of those in there. I'm just going to pull one out at random. This one, top of the pile, Mortal Kombat. Now I'm going to put it in the Super Nintendo slot, and that is the third slot from the front. And again, it's sized for the US cards and the European ones and the Japanese ones. Now I'm just looking down into the slot, and I can tell you the pins look an absolute mess. Before this came to me, there was some known issues with the pins for this Super Nintendo slot, and I'm somewhat reluctant to put a game cartridge in there, but okay, I'll go ahead and do that. Okay. Looking up to the screen now, it says that no cart has been inserted. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and take that out and put it back in, because I did at one point have some luck getting in there. But looking into the cartridge slot itself, I'd say at least 2 or 3 of the pins either look to be missing or completely bent. Now, I don't know whether you saw that on screen. It says unknown cartridge, but it did attempt to load. But it just gives you an idea of the workmanship on one of these devices. Incredibly poor. I'm going to try a few more times just to see if I can get this Super Nintendo one working. There we go. Fortunate. It says unknown cartridge. So I will I'll ask it to play it. And there's absolutely nothing there at all. Clearly the pins are so badly damaged that it just cannot play the Super Nintendo games anymore. So that would be a major turn off for me in buying one of these if somebody offered me one for purchase, or even buying it directly from the company, Hyperkin. It's just the workmanship of the device. I don't think I've attempted to play Sega Genesis or Sega Master System. Sorry, it doesn't play Master System games, MegaDrive games on there yet. But I'm just gonna give it a go. I'm just gonna put the Sonic game in there. Now this Sonic game's only ever been inside a genuine European MegaDrive. I've never put one in the Retron before, so let's see what the cartridge slots are like. It does look fairly clean in fairness, this particular slot, so I'm just gonna slide this one down. It correctly stops on the MegaDrive light, or the Genesis light on the front. One thing that's nice about these consoles is on the left hand side there are ports for the Sega Genesis, the NES and the Super NES, and on the right hand side as well. So you basically got 2 slots for each one of those consoles that you can use. And you can use any pad, so even though I've got a genuine Super Nintendo pad plugged into there, I could use that, or I could use a Genesis pad. So I'm just going to grab a Genesis pad now from my gaming shelf, and it's one of the original ones. And I'm going to plug that into the side, into the Genesis port. Okay, so it's in there now. And looking at the screen, using the Genesis, the MegaDrive pad, I am able to correctly navigate the menus up and down there. So I'm going to see if I can play this game. This is Sonic 2. Well, the good news is the sound is good, or at least it sounded okay during that intro. It's certainly nice and clean. So yeah, the Retron 5 seems to be doing a great job here. I've no major issues with it for Sega Genesis games, other than the fact that I guess after a prolonged period of time, or maybe not so prolonged period in the case of the Super Nintendo one, the cartridge slot broke. And that's something you definitely don't want to be paying good money for, to end up with a system that only plays a few games consoles. So that's the Retron 5, which is okay. I'm just going to switch that off. I think you just hold it down. There we go, and it shuts down. Or of course, you could try and get your hands on a Super Nintendo Classic, which looks something like that. Now this Super Nintendo Classic has been modified slightly, and you can see this at the back, and it's got a micro USB card in the back here. And it's been modified with Kyle and K. You can search for him on YouTube. Kyle and K has created a USB host modification, which allows you to put a USB memory stick into the back of an on-the-go adapter. And this is my on-the-go adapter here, just sticking in. And you should be able to play games from the USB. Now, I've set mine up for many different consoles. So in a way, when I saw this Retron 5 in the back of my wreckage cupboard, I thought I'll quickly pull that out and just show you. You know, you've got all these cables, all this mess. You've got the fact that the hardware isn't very good, definitely substandard. If Hyperkin possibly want to replace this, as it was given to me from somebody else, I don't know if they'd do that, but I know they're a good company and they tend to fix the mistakes. But certainly, when you look at the Retron 5 compared to an SNES Classic, I think there's only one choice. In terms of other pads, you can always plug a USB hub into the back of the USB on-the-go slot, and you can add USB adapters for Sega Genesis, NES, and SNES, other SNES controllers as well. So I'm just going to start up this and just show you, I guess, why you shouldn't buy a Retron 5. So powering on there. I'm just switching the USB, sorry, the HDMI. There we go, that's a little bit better. So I've just got my Super Nintendo pad plugged into the front of the SNES Classic, and I'm just going to go through some of the games consoles that this can emulate, because it's all emulation, just like the Retron 5. That was emulation, it was just dumping the cartridge onto internal memory before running. So we've got the NES games, and I think, if you remember, I tried Super Mario 3, so I'm just going to go to the S's here, and I'm going to look for Super Mario 3. So nice and quick, the emulation starts. And again, just like the Retron 5, we've got this kind of beige line down the side. So I guess you may have had that with a with an NES original, depending on what CRT you were using, but it works fine, just as you'd expect it to. But of course, the nice thing about the SNES Classic is you can just reset, use your save. The user interface is far better than the Retron 5. I think you can do a lot of tricks on the Retron 5, like save states as well, but it's just so much nicer with an original Nintendo product, even if you have modded it. I'm just going to come out of this menu now and go back to the root folder. and I'm going to show you in the root folder I have an NES Classic Edition. Now this is a dual boot solution, so I can actually boot the NES Classic firmware as well, and you can see I've got Super Mario in there to play if I wanted to play it. I've also got NES pads for the NES Classic which work on the SNES Classic, so that's great. Onto the Genesis now. So I think I played Sonic the Hedgehog 2, so let's just give that a quick go. It's right there. Working full screen just like the Retron 5. Apart from the fact I can add extra ROMs to my SNES Classic with a lot more ease and simplicity than I can with the Retron 5. And I've got to say, the sound does seem better with the RetroArch core that's been on here. I think it's the Genesis GX Plus. Not really a big Sega fan, especially back in the 16-bit day, but it's okay, works fairly well. And again, coming out of it there. But there's so much more, I guess, to the SNES Classic than the Retron 5. The Retron 5 is stuck to Sega Genesis or MegaDrive. It's stuck to SNES, NES, Famicon, and Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. Whereas, obviously, with the SNES Classic, yeah, it's nice, it's small. Just look at the size of this thing compared to the Retron. It's probably more powerful as well. I'm sure somebody can do a teardown if you have a look for a teardown of the Retron 5. I have had a look inside there because I was looking at how badly the pins were damaged. And I've got to say, Nintendo have made an absolutely fantastic product here with their SNES Classic. So back up here now to the other consoles that this one can emulate. So you're not just stuck to the bare bones there. Yes, you can go and play Nintendo Game Boy Advance ones in there, Game Boy Color as well. So if I go to Minish Cap, that's a great game. Again, you're getting full screen emulation. As you can see, it definitely plays Game Boy Advance games without any problem. One of the other things this does, which is quite nice, in fact, I've got a Sony PS1 game on there. Still only added Ridge Racer, but there's a lot of games that I want to add on there and have a look at. Never quite managed to clear this. But the emulation for PlayStation seems to be quite good. So I'd like to see the Retron 5 do this. Hopefully in the future the Retron 5 will get itself some custom firmware and be completely cracked wide open. That would be really nice. I'm just going to come out of that. So other systems apart from the PlayStation, the Genesis, the NES and the Super Nintendo, I've got PC Engine games on here. I think I added a few. So I think some of the best games, the R-Type was fairly good, so let me just have a quick look. It might actually be in the other folder. Operation Wolf there, Outrun. And this is quite funny because I'm just going to load it up now. Okay, so this is the PC Engine running Outrun. In fairness, it's not terrible. There are a lot of other systems it ran worse on. Master System was one of them. If I only knew how to change gear here. Oh, there we go. Nope. It's okay, it runs. I'll just come back out of this now and show you, before I sign off, I'll show you an arcade game. Now, this was one of the more recent games I've added to the SNES Classic. This one here is Outrun Arcade. Now this is running on MAME, I think it might be MAME 2012. I'll just check the core just so I can show you. So it's FB Alpha. Now there is some sound issues and some minor frame rate issues. But other than that, it kind of beats having to plug the Saturn in. Because there was an absolutely perfect arcade port on the Sega Saturn. So once you're away from the sprites at the start, it does tend to improve slightly. As you can hear, there's a slight stutter to the soundtrack. But I always wanted to play Outrun on my Super Nintendo, and I guess now I finally got to. But yeah, I think the worst thing about this one is just the sound. It kind of spoils the game, but it's okay. I've also tried Ridge Racer Arcade, that's not quite got there yet. Nintendo 64 games work fine, and as I say, Master System games are in there as well. Neo Geo, now that's maybe one I haven't showed you yet, but that's something certainly that the Retron 5 doesn't do very well, or at all in fact in this case, but Neo Geo games work really well on the Super Nintendo Classic. And of course, if you kind of go to RetroArch and come back, I think you sometimes get the, there we go, you get the in-game menu, so you can actually have a look at the cheat database and give yourself some extra lives and things like that. Now hopefully in the next few weeks I'll be ordering myself a Neo Geo X USB controller, and that should allow me to plug it into a USB hub and actually play using a more traditional controller for the Neo Geo games. Obviously that was going AWOL because of the cheats that I put on there, but it's a great little system, the SNES Classic. If you're in the market for a Retron 5, I think these retail for somewhere over £100, certainly $150 I've heard going for. I suggest you you don't do it. It's not really great. Even if you've got a massive collection, you should not put your trust of your game cards in the Retron 5's hands. Rather, just go through emulation, because that's all that the Retron 5's doing after all. It's only emulating. So you may as well have a quality product from Nintendo with the USB host on there. Just going to turn it off and show you that USB host modification a little bit closer. For those that have subscribed to my channel, thank you very much. You've probably seen this before, but I'll just show you one more time. So what we have in here is we have a USB on-the-go adapter, and that's this L-shaped adapter here that gets plugged in. I've just stirred it up with some blue tack. This blue tack just makes sure that it doesn't wobble or doesn't move much. You've got to make sure you get the USB on-the-go adapter that points away from the HDMI socket. Obviously, you can't afford to cover this up. So I got myself a right-angled one instead of a left-angled one. I guess it thinks of it looking at it this way, but I got myself the right-angled one. And that just has a single USB port just here, if I can focus on it. No, just here at the side. and I just slot in my micro SD card into the back of the SNES Classic, and then plug in the power, and the power is just here. And the power's a pass-through. It powers the Super Nintendo Classic fine, and obviously you put the HDMI in, and there you go. So as you can see, that's much more secure with a bit of blue tack than it would be otherwise, but it doesn't do any damage. It's only blue tack, and it means that you can easily eject or pull out the USB plug without moving the power too much, or risking resetting it. Well, thanks very much, guys, for watching. This is the end of the video. As usual, please like, subscribe, or dislike. Leave a comment. I'll answer any questions that you may have. But all I can say is please, 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 for the love of God, stay away from the Retron 5. If you value your cartridges, which clearly I've only put some very, very common ones in here. That's, you know, Mortal Kombat, Sonic 2, Mario 3. There's nothing of any value there, so if any one of those cartridges got destroyed, I wouldn't be too upset. But what you really want to be doing is you want to be sticking with the original consoles there from Nintendo and from Sega, which I have on top of my cupboards. You don't want to be putting your hands in on one of these devices here, because they are just too poor. In fact, just before we finish up the video, let me try and show you a close-up of the Retron 5 damage to the pins, because this really is what the risk is. So this is the Famicon, which I don't think any Famicom games have ever been plugged into this console, and all of those look relatively good. Next up we have the NES. If you look inside here, you can see there are a few pins that just don't look too good. Super Nintendo next, and this is the one that looks worse, I guess. And this has some missing pins, especially down this end, just down here. And obviously I don't want to damage my cartridges. And then we had the Sega Genesis slot, or the MegaDrive slot, and I'm really having to, in fact it was very difficult to pull that out with one hand, but you can see here that this slot again is barely used. So all I can say to you that is, if you do value your cartridges, you know, when you're thinking about retro gaming, please don't go for the Retron 5. Go for something else, because it's just clearly not up to the job right now. Okay, right. Thanks very much, guys, for watching. Hopefully this has shed some light onto the benefits of this Super Nintendo Classic over a Retron 5. I'll catch you on the flip side. Thank you.